When money moves, it doesn't whisper, it roars. And right now, if you listen closely, that roar sounds a lot like a warning. Most people think financial storms arrive without notice, a sudden crash, a panic, a headline shouting crisis. But in truth, the signs are almost always there. You just have to know where to look. The Federal Reserve recently hinted that it might stop shrinking its balance sheet in plain language, stop pulling money out of the system. On paper, that sounds like good news. More liquidity, cheaper loans, stock prices rising again. But history tells us that every time money starts flowing too freely, it's usually not the beginning of a party. It's the beginning of a cleanup. When the Fed says it's done tightening, what it often means is that someone somewhere is already bleeding. Think back to every boom and bust. The late stages always look the same. The crowd rushes in, confident that risk has vanished. Stocks hit record highs. Experts smile on TV. The system feels indestructible until it isn't. It's easy to assume that rich investors always make money after a crash, but that's only half the story. The real wealth, the kind that multiplies quietly, is made right before things fall apart. That's when the patient few sell while everyone else is still buying, smiling, and celebrating. Let's imagine it simply. You buy a stock at $50 thinking it's cheap because it used to be $100. You feel smart. But if the stock never climbs back, your bargain becomes a trap. Meanwhile, someone else buys it from you at 60, not because they know the future, but because they understand the game. They know how the tide moves. And when that tide lifts prices again to 600, you're left counting the crumbs while they count the fortune. Cheap doesn't mean safe. High doesn't mean late. The real trick is understanding where the money's about to move and why. When fear grips the market, the instinct is to sell fast, to protect what's left. When greed returns, the instinct flips buy before it's too late. But both impulses are the same emotion wearing different clothes. That's why so few people ever escape the cycle. Now, picture this. A flood of money is coming. You know your house sits in the floodplain. Do you rush to sell, or do you build higher ground? Most people panic and sell cheap, thinking they're escaping the storm. But smart investors, they build dams together. They link arms. They lift the market just long enough to sell to the panicked buyers who still believe the sun will shine forever. When a capitalist wants to sell, they don't shout fire in the theater. They start the music louder. They call in friends, raise prices, and make you feel like you're missing the opportunity of a lifetime. That's how wealth shifts quietly from the impatient to the prepared. Remember 2008? Before the collapse, balance sheets looked fine, profits looked strong, and housing prices never go down. Then they did fast. But those who had already exited months earlier, those who watched the system strain under its own optimism, were ready. Selling isn't panic. Selling is foresight. And when giants move, they do it slowly. They can't just dump billions overnight. That would crash the very thing they're trying to profit from. So they coordinate. They sell in waves, over months, even years. And the public doesn't notice, not until the waves stop rising. So when you see headlines about rate cuts, stimulus, or soft landings, ask yourself one question: who benefits most if the music keeps playing just a little longer? The answer is rarely you. When the Federal Reserve says it will pause shrinking its balance sheet, most people cheer. They imagine lower interest rates, easier credit, and stock charts that only point up. But behind that cheerful announcement hides something fragile, a system running out of breath. Liquidity is like oxygen. You don't notice it until it's gone. When the Fed starts pulling money out of the market, every loan, every business, every paycheck becomes a little tighter. The banks start feeling it first, then the companies, then the people. For the last few years, the Fed has been removing trillions of dollars from the system. It began in 2022, slowly, like draining water from a pool. But the pool wasn't small. It was the global ocean of dollars that the world depends on. Imagine removing $2.7 trillion, an amount close to the entire foreign currency reserves of China, in just 3 years. The world has never seen money vanish that fast. When the money leaves, it doesn't just disappear from Wall Street. It disappears from small businesses, mortgages, and credit cards. Every dollar pulled back is a dollar that stops working. And that is why the pressure builds quietly until something breaks. In 2023, that break came for several American banks. They weren't poorly managed. They were simply swimming in a shrinking pool. As money drained out, their assets froze. The system that had always been safe suddenly wasn't. Yet, even then, the headline said the same comforting phrase, the system is stable. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Federal Reserve isn't just managing inflation. It's managing trust. When the money starts tightening, it wants the world to believe everything is fine, because panic moves faster than policy. But watch the patterns. When the Fed pulls back too long, something cracks. Then it quietly reverses course, injects money again, calls it temporary support, and the cycle starts again. The public believes it's all about inflation, but it's really about survival. Because if too many banks fall, if too many loans stop circulating, the entire system stalls. So the Fed pumps air back in, pretending it's oxygen for growth. In truth, it's a rescue breath. That's why inflation never truly goes away. The moment it begins to cool, the Fed loosens the valve again. It's like trying to drain a bathtub while leaving the faucet running. The water line never really drops. This is why money feels strange right now. Prices rise, but so do stock markets. Banks collapse, but tech stocks soar. It's not logic, it's liquidity. And when you see both inflation and optimism at the same time, it's a sign the medicine is stronger than the patient can handle. You can think of the economy as a heart. The Fed is the one holding the syringe. Sometimes it injects money, sometimes it withdraws it. Either way, the goal isn't to heal the heart. It's to keep it beating just long enough to avoid a cardiac arrest. The truth few people admit is that liquidity isn't created evenly. When the Fed adds money, it first lands in the accounts of large institutions, not households. By the time it trickles down to regular people, the wealthy have already positioned themselves. They buy assets before the headlines change. By the time the average investor feels safe again, it's already too late. And this is how wealth keeps moving in the same direction, upward. Every cycle ends with the same illusion that the worst is over, that this time will be different, that we can print our way to stability. But cycles don't end with peace. They end with exhaustion. The investors who survive are not the ones who predict every move. They're the ones who recognize the pattern, step aside when the tide turns, and wait for clarity. Because markets are not designed to reward optimism, they're designed to transfer wealth from those who act emotionally to those who act early. The world runs on dollars, not gold, not oil, not even productivity. The dollar is the bloodstream of global trade. And when the United States Central Bank tightens that flow, the rest of the world starts gasping for air. Every time the Fed drains liquidity, nations that depend on dollars must fight to keep their economies alive. Factories in Asia slow down. Emerging markets scramble for loans. Currencies collapse quietly, while headlines stay focused on Wall Street's latest rally. It's not coincidence, it's design. When dollars become scarce, they grow more powerful. Every country holding them grows weaker. That's how the system was built. The Fed's tightening doesn't just slow inflation at home, it tightens the rope abroad. Because when nations can't find dollars, they have no choice but to borrow them again, from the same banks that caused the shortage in the first place. It's a quiet monopoly. One country prints the world's money, lends it out, then pulls it back when it wants control. When the world stumbles, that country prints again, pretending to save what it quietly strangled. Inside America, the illusion continues. Even as the Fed drains money, it allows banks to multiply what's left through leverage. A single dollar can be loaned 10 times. Each time it moves, it looks like new wealth, but it's only a shadow of the original. That's why inflation doesn't vanish when the Fed tightens. It only changes shape. Think of it like this. A magician pulls coins from the air. The audience claps, but they forget he hid them in his sleeve. The economy works the same way. When the Fed says it's pulling back money, another arm of the system quietly creates more. Loans, derivatives, credit expansion, it all adds up to the same illusion. Money without value, growth without foundation. For a while, this game works. Banks lend more, businesses borrow more, stock prices rise. But the more money circulates without backing, the more fragile the system becomes. When someone finally asks for real cash, not promises, the curtain falls. That's what happened to several U.S. banks. They didn't run out of ideas, they ran out of confidence. Their reserves fell too low, and suddenly stable turned into bank run. The Fed stepped in, not because it wanted to, but because it had to. Without those interventions, the cracks would have widened into collapse. And yet, each rescue creates the next disaster. When risk is never punished, it grows bolder. When pain is always postponed, it grows larger. The Fed now faces a trap of its own making. It can't keep tightening because the system will break, but it can't keep loosening because inflation will rise again. It's like holding a balloon underwater. The moment you let go, it bursts to the surface. Meanwhile, the rest of the world watches. Europe, Asia, Latin America, all caught in the undertow of the dollar tide. When America prints, their currencies weaken. When America tightens, their debts grow heavier. Either way, they lose. That's why countries are searching for escape routes. Gold, digital currencies, bilateral trade deals that bypass the dollar. But none of them can move fast enough. Because power doesn't just live in money, it lives in momentum. And the dollar has been moving the world for a century. When a system grows this dependent, collapse doesn't happen with noise. It starts with silence, liquidity quietly vanishing, credit slowly freezing, trust fading day by day. And the average investor, reading headlines about resilient markets, never realizes the oxygen is already running out. Every financial system depends on two invisible forces, confidence and reserves. One keeps people calm, the other keeps money moving. When either starts to fade, the whole structure trembles. Right now, both are slipping. The reserves that once acted as the safety net of American banks are draining faster than anyone expected. Banks are required to keep a fraction of deposits as a cushion, but most keep extra for safety. Those cushions are thinning. The reserves that were once close to $4 trillion are now near the danger zone. At the same time, the U.S. government is issuing record amounts of debt, $2 trillion in new bonds in just a few months. To sell those bonds, someone has to buy them. But when foreign investors hesitate and the Fed itself is still selling, the burden falls on domestic banks. That means the same institutions already short on reserves are now lending to the government. In simple terms, the blood transfusion that's supposed to save the patient is coming from the same patient's veins. This is why the Fed is trapped. If it keeps draining liquidity, more banks will collapse. If it prints again, inflation returns. So, the only option left is to pause and pretend that pause is a plan. But pausing doesn't fix a shortage. It only delays the moment everyone realizes there's not enough left to go around. Look at the signals. The overnight reverse repo facility, once holding $3 trillion of Wall Street's spare cash, is almost empty. That pool acted as the system's emergency fund. Today, it's a puddle. When the next shock hits, there will be nothing left to drain. This is the part of the cycle where optimism feels strongest. The headlines speak of recovery. The markets hit new highs. The narrative shifts from fear to confidence. But under that calm surface, pressure is building. The dollar index has been falling for months, showing that capital is leaking out of the United States. The world isn't running towards safety, it's running out of it. Commercial real estate is cracking. Office towers stand half empty while loans tied to them pile up in regional banks. Credit card debt is at a record high, and defaults are climbing. Consumers are still spending, but it's not income. They're burning tomorrow's money today. This is how bubbles disguise themselves. They wear the mask of progress. Every data point looks fine until the revision comes months later, showing how weak it really was. By then, it's too late. The pattern is old. Every major financial collapse begins with faith in numbers, in leaders, in systems that always bounce back. Then the small cracks appear, ignored at first. A few banks fall, a few assets lose value. The experts call them isolated cases. Then one day, isolation becomes contagion. When that day comes, the Fed will print again. It will say it's temporary. It will promise control. But the damage will already be done because money cannot solve a crisis of belief. Smart investors know this moment well. It's the calm before the turn. The music is still playing, but the exits are getting crowded. This is when patience becomes the rarest currency of all. When the next wave hits, those holding assets built on cheap debt will suffer most. But those holding real value cash, gold, productive businesses will have the power to buy when others are forced to sell. History rewards the prepared, not the hopeful. The crowd will still believe that everything is fine until it isn't. But the ones who remember that every pause hides a warning will already be standing on higher ground. Markets recover, economies rebuild, but trust once lost takes a generation to return. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Wealth is not about predicting the storm, it's about building a house that stands when it hits. If you've made it this far, you already understand something most people never see. The market isn't a mystery, it's a mirror. It reflects our fear, our greed, and our patience. Every cycle is a test of discipline, not prediction. So as the noise gets louder and the headlines swing between panic and euphoria, stay calm, protect your liquidity, protect your focus, and remember that the goal isn't to time the market, it's to survive it long enough to let compounding do its work. If this video helped you see things more clearly, give it a like so more people can find it. Subscribe to The Passive Path for future deep dives into money, mindset, and the hidden forces shaping wealth. Share this video with someone you care about, a friend, a colleague, or that one person who always says, "I'll start investing when things feel safer." Good luck out there, stay sharp, stay patient, and I'll see you in the next video.